Professor, developmental biology was one of the main actors of what we can call a small revolution in evolutionary biology during the second half of the 20th century. And this revolution culminated in what we call today Evo-Devo. What is exactly Evo-Devo?
Okay. Evolutionary developmental biology, Evo-Devo, is the idea that in addition to natural selection, you also have embryology, development, as a major force in evolution. The notion of Evo-Devo is that you have to explain not only the survival of the fittest, but also the arrival of the fittest. How do you get new phenotypes? How does nature change an organism from one organism to another? The only way to change an organism from one type to another is to change its development, to change how it works as an embryo. So if I work on how does a turtle get its shell, I'm asking the question, how does an animal without its shell become an animal with its shell? How does nature make something new without destroying that which is old and working? So while natural selection, which is the primary focus of evolutionary biology, looks at the survival of the fittest, we're looking at the arrival. You can also say that there are two types of creativity at work in evolution. Development has the aspects of the creativity of an artist, making something new. Natural selection has the creativity of a curator, figuring out which things work together, what things are possible of surviving, and what things will be put away in storage.
And Evo-Devo itself as a field study has been subjected to further updates in the latest years. And today we talk about Eco-Evo-Devo. What does it mean?
Ecological evolutionary developmental biology, Eco-Evo-Devo, is the notion that in addition to the genome having a major role in the production of an organism, so does the environment. When a turtle, for instance, has its sex determined, the sex determination of a turtle is not done by chromosomes, it's done by temperature. Some temperatures favor the gonads to become testes, some temperatures favor the gonads to be ovaries. Many organisms have things like diet or density, predators, inducing their development in different ways. So to construct an organism, you not only need the genes from your parents, you also need environmental factors. For instance, Daphnia, the pond flea, develops in a certain way if the pond does not have predators, and it usually makes lots of eggs. If there are predators in the pond, it will take some of that energy away from making eggs, and it will make defensive armaments so that it won't fit into the jaw of its predator. And so what a Daphnia looks like, its phenotype, depends not only on the genes from its parents, but also the environment that it's growing in. So Evo-Devo is saying that this is a function of development, that developmental changes can occur from the environment. And what if those environmental changes get passed on through some way? And how might these environmental agencies get passed on? And this leads to the notion of epigenetics, where the environment not only affects the organism that is living, but affects generations afterwards, often by modifying the DNA of that organism, so that the presence of a predator may not only cause the Daphnia that's there in the pond to develop, but the next generation as well, by changing the DNA so that the next generation doesn't even have to respond. It says, a predator is probable in this environment. I'm already set to have this new phenotype.
So the notion of inheritance also in this new comprehensive view is expanded, let's say.
Yes.
And there is also this common idea that evolution is mainly a matter of competition. But if we study organisms' development, we see that cooperation can occur at a very fundamental level. One of your latest researches are about studying symbiotic relationships between organisms. Can you tell us something about this?
Sure. It used to be thought that the only genes important in development were the genes you get from your parents, the zygote genes. It turns out that about half of the cells in our body are not from our parents, not directly anyway, they're bacteria. And the genes come from the bacteria, and many more genes come from the bacteria than come from our parents. And the question is, are these genes involved? Are these bacteria involved in making us who we are? And when we look at mice, we find that the bacteria are critical for the development of the mouse. Often the mouse and many other animals are still developing after they pass through the birth canal. So when they're born and they pass through the birth canal, they acquire whole populations of microbes, of bacteria. Now these bacteria interact with the other cells of the body in a positive way. And this positive way was not understood until very recently. It had been thought that bacteria were bad, the immune system gets rid of the bacteria. Now it's seen that the bacteria are actually responsible for inducing some of our immune system. We cannot form major parts of our immune system without the bacteria telling us to. We've outsourced developmental signals to the bacteria. We expect the bacteria. We help the bacteria get into our bodies. And once it's there, it tells our cells what to do. Sometimes it tells our cells to make the tissues of the immune system. In mice, the bacteria also tell the cells of the intestine to make the blood vessels that surround them. There are bacteria that are critical for the normal development of the mouse brain. So instead of just being bad things for the body or even neutral things for the body has come to expect bacteria. And development is a team sport. It's not done only by the cells we get from our parents, from the fertilized egg. It's also from the bacteria. So we expect the bacteria to be there. We expect the bacteria to help our body to produce the organs of our body. The bacteria help us become us.
These interactions are really complex, and can we think of a single unique theory that can explain all these kind of interactions in a comprehensive way altogether?
I think that this is one of the big goals of evolutionary biology right now, is to integrate development, ecology, paleontology, and the natural selection population genetics. It's kind of like in physics to find the unified, the unified theory of everything. We need to find a unified theory of evolution. We have major parts of it. It's putting it together because the sum is so much greater than the product of its parts. And so we're finding synergy between development and evolution, and it's explaining sometimes the fossil record. For instance, we did not know until recently what the ancestor of a turtle was. When we knew how the turtle develops, we knew what to expect in the fossil record of an ancestor of a turtle. The notion of cooperation and competition are becoming integrated, such that the view that those animals that cooperate best might be more fit to survive. So cooperation and competition are really mixed here. It's very much like team sports, I think, that when you try out for a team, if you want to be the goalie on a football team, you might be in competition with other people who want to be goalies. But once you are the goalie, you are in cooperation with your team. And your cooperative team is in competition with another cooperative team. And together you form a league, which is a cooperative entity that sometimes has to fight for money and for television time with other leagues. And so competition and cooperation are very intimately linked together, and we don't really have a good vocabulary. Richard Powers, who wrote a very interesting novel called Overstory, says that it's very difficult to separate competition from all the different flavors of cooperation. I think that's a good way of thinking about it.
Thank you very much, Professor.
You're very welcome.